Taylor Decker's on my All-22 fantasy team.
Stop. They don't care.
So the strategic component to this game is through the roof.
Your predictions, right? Your forecasting in fantasy football into how good is this player?
This is it's gonna change the industry.
Yeah, I moved to the old town where it goes down. Look at me now. I wrote my goals down. I hold it down. Made myself proud.
What is up, everybody? Welcome into another All-22 podcast. You got Ray and Chris on today. We're going to talk about it right off the bat. We are live for signups using promo code second season. That's the number 2 ND season, where you can get $20 off the first year of your All-22 membership. So get in there and sign up. It's only a couple more weeks to get a draft in. And if you can't tell, I'm like pretty hyped up right now because Ray and I have a nice trip to go on tomorrow to celebrate All-22 Bobby. I'm pumped, Ray. How do you feel? You don't look great, but I feel great.
Yeah, like long drives are not usually part of the agenda for late August, early September, unless we're going to like an actual football game. And who knows, maybe we are. That's part of the beauty of the mystery here, right? So yeah, super excited. This is the greatest time of year heading into Labor Day weekend. You got college football like sort of full-blown kickoff now, a week away from the NFL. Things are great. Things are fantastic. Could not be any better.
Good. Glad you feel that way looking how you look. I wanted to tell everybody really quickly about the IR process updates that we've made to the All-22 game. So we've decided to kind of fine tune that IR process, and step by step, I'm going to go through what we did here. So essentially player updates to injuries will be made hourly. Going forward, you will get an update on your IR status, injury status, questionable, out every hour. And then players with that IR status will still be automatically removed from your active roster and put onto your IR. If you don't know where that is, if you go to your My Team page, at the bottom of that page, you'll see your active roster and your IR. That's where you could kind of toggle between those two sections and see the players that are on your active roster, the players that have been pulled and put onto your IR. So where things kind of changed from last year is last year, we were automatically removing a player from IR once that tag got changed. So if a player got taken off of IR from the real team, we were removing them automatically from the IR of your team. The reason we decided to change this is because there were people that essentially would get stuck, working late at nights on, Wednesday, Thursday night, and they wouldn't see that pull would put them over that 53 roster limit. And we don't want to do that to people, right? That would be unfortunate. So what we decided to do is we will automatically remove people from your IR only on Tuesday at 3 p.m. So the other time that you will get to do this is anytime, but you have to do it yourself. So if you want to pull somebody from IR that's active and looking to play, you have to go to your IR status on your My Team page. And there's a button there for you to just pull them back onto your active roster. You can do that at any time before that player's game starts. So this is a big change. We think it'll give you more flexibility and just put everybody else in a better situation to win.
Yeah, essentially to really boil it down in one sentence, right? You're still doing your real-time pull for players on IR in the NFL onto your injured reserve in All-22, because when that happens, they serve you no purpose, right? They're not going to play, but you now have the flexibility to, at any time, remove that player from your injured reserve back onto your active roster if you do anticipate them playing on the upcoming Sunday or Monday or Thursday game, while they still have that IR designation tag on them. So just more, user flexibility throughout the week, just giving you the ability you need to make all the moves you need to before the games kick off.
Exactly. And Ray, we have something kind of fun going on behind the scenes, but we're actually in a rookie draft with the PFF employees. So we have Sam, we have Steve, we have Trevor, we have all those guys on this All-22 league that we've been running now. This is year 3. We have a rookie draft going right now, and I'm pretty pumped because of course I got my guy, Captain Jack Campbell, and then I got Emmanuel Forbes, but I actually got Forbes in the first round and Campbell in the second round this year. Who did you end up with so far?
Oh my gosh. I ended up with Christian Gonzalez and Broderick Jones. So I got sniped right off the bat, right? Paris Johnson was taken from my grasp early on, so I couldn't get my OT1 in this class, but I like it. I think Gonzalez and Forbes, and we talked about it on the draft show, right? They're essentially, at least in my opinion, a toss up for CB1. Forbes made, I think, was our consensus final cornerback one in this class, but I think those are two really talented corners in what was a strong cornerback class this year. So, great stuff. It's still going on right now, and so that's just, again, what makes this time of year so fun. We're winding down those rookie drafts, sort of, fine tuning the rosters before the sprint of the NFL season begins.
Exactly. And I'll admit I'm an episode behind on Hard Knocks still, so I'm not going to talk about Hard Knocks like we have been. But let's go into the preseason storylines, because there's been a few big ones the past week, right? And the biggest of which is Trey Lance is traded to the Cowboys. So Ray, before I kind of give my opinion, of course, I'm going to go to the Cowboy fan and ask, what do you think?
He's just a backup quarterback. That's all he is. He's a backup quarterback with some upside. His physical profile is pretty close to Dak Prescott's, so it makes sense as far as what it goes for getting a backup quarterback for someone like Dak Prescott, right? That same stylistic approach. I think we talked about it last episode, maybe an episode before, about a backup quarterback such as Tanner McKee for Jalen Hurts. Great quarterback, right? Or at least as backup is concerned, his performances were great, talking about Tanner McKee. But stylistically, there's a bit of a mismatch there, right? And so I think when you went from Dak Prescott to Cooper Rush last year, you saw a change in just the type of throws that they're able to make and the way that they play the game. There's a change in the offense that has to be made when you go from one quarterback to the other. And yes, there's always going to be a step down in quality of play when you're talking about losing a starter, right? But you would prefer as an offensive coordinator, as a coaching staff, to not have to change your offense itself so much if you do have to rely on those backup quarterbacks. And so I think what Trey Lance allows the Cowboys to really do is maintain that offensive style and play calling because he has that same profile as Dak Prescott. And then for Trey Lance himself, I think it's a good spot for him. Again, just sort of take a step back. Yeah, he needs a ton of reps. And I mean, he's just not going to be able to get them in the regular season if all goes according to plan. But when you have an established quarterback in front of you, when it comes to training camp and preseason for 2024 and beyond, that allows a young player like Trey Lance to really take the lion's share of those reps and develop at that time, while, for whatever they're worth, taking the mental reps, so to speak, from someone like a Dak Prescott who has that similar profile to them. So I think it's more of a long-term developmental play for Trey Lance. And then in particular for a team like the Cowboys, you have another quarterback in the room that kind of fits the profile of your starter. So that allows you to stay consistent week to week if for any reason you need to go to him.
For sure. And I mean, it's a cheap backup, right? You traded a 4th-round pick for a backup that could be, right, has all the potential in the world to be a high-end starter even, right? And that's what the 49ers were banking on. Didn't work out for them, but it doesn't mean it couldn't work out for the Cowboys, although it seems like what they're really trying to do is just get, like you said, a backup that fits the mold of Dak. Dak, we have him as our 8th ranked quarterback for like Dynasty. I think he's a top 10 quarterback. So I think all the hype around Lance potentially taking his job is kind of hogwash. The only thing that is interesting to me, if you look
Bayless or whoever,
yeah, exactly. But the only part of it that's a little interesting to me is the way that the money's set up and the years, right? So like Dak has his contract runs out in 2024, but they owe him money in 25 and 26. So like you do that knowing that you're going to sign him to an extension so that money, you're not having somebody with dead cap on your team, right? And Dak being a quarterback can play well into his 30s. So I think that's the agenda, but he does technically run out in 2024. Whereas Lance has now 23 and 24 with the Cowboys. And I believe they will inherit that 5th-year option for him that they can pull. So that's when it gets interesting if they decide to pull that 5th-year option and use it. And they would then have Lance on the books in 2025 and not have Dak on the books. So maybe I'm reading into it too much. Again, I think they'll likely extend Dak way before that. But if we don't see a Dak extension and we see them pick up that 5th-year option on Lance, that's when I think people can start talking, and maybe the rumor mill should start at that point.
Yeah, and we're a long way off from that, right? It could be a simple play of, hey, let's get him in here, right? Obviously, you want to see what you got with the upside, and for the next 2 years, have that quarterback in your room. And they could also just say, all right, when his contract runs out, I think he would be part of the compensatory pick formula at that point, if I'm not mistaken, right? So even if you don't bring him back, he'll get signed somewhere. He's a quarterback, and you can get a 4th or 5th round compensatory pick, 3 years from now anyway. That kind of makes up for what you just traded for him. So lots of different angles that can be taken when looking at the Trey Lance, saga, acquisition, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, let's just let it play out.
Yeah. And then the couple other trades happened, but a lot smaller in kind of scope, right? It's like Albert OK gets traded to the Eagles. I think he's like a decent player and could end up doing okay there. Cardinals trade for Josh Dobbs, right? So like that was a big storyline just because they released Colt McCoy, who was projected to be their starter. Now they have Dobbs and a rookie quarterback going into week 1. So they haven't named a starter yet, but could Dobbs really be their plan to be their starter? Seems to be that way, which is kind of an interesting thing to follow. I think from an all-22 perspective, don't touch Josh Dobbs just because like that offense is going to be so bad and that team's just going to be so bad. Situation will be really hard for him. Don't really think it's worth the flyer. And then a couple injuries. Jerry Jeudy, is dealing with some injury stuff. JSN is dealing with some injury stuff. Two kind of similar players, right, with the way they play football, just route running, smaller sized receivers. And that's kind of like the risk you take with some of those type players, right, is like the injury concerns are real. And we've talked kind of ad nausea about Jerry Jeudy, so I don't want to talk too much about him here. But one other kind of big move, and it was a move to retain a player, was the Dolphins signing Zach Seiler to a 3-year contract extension. So we've kind of talked about positional value and all those things. I think this is a really interesting example of that, because Seiler is one of those players who isn't really an every down guy, right? So he had 500 snaps basically in 2020 and 2021 before getting closer to 900 last year. So last year was really the first time that he's like this every down player, but it's still like he didn't even get to 1,000 snaps, right? Most starters in the NFL get to 1,000 snaps. So they give him a 3-year, $38.65 million deal with $20 million guaranteed, right? So again, he's making more per year right now than the best running backs in the NFL. So something just really interesting, right? This kind of work sharing defensive interior that has played well and is valuable to the Dolphins is making more than the best running backs in the NFL right now. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, we just these poor running backs. We don't do it. We just observe what's happening. But yeah, they just every which way you look at it, they're just getting beat up on. And Zach Seiler himself, yeah, he's a good player. He's a very good rotational piece. That's a key piece over there in Miami. So it's good to lock that player up through his age 30 season. Again, just continuing to solidify the depth and rotation around that defense that everybody is so high on. It's a great unit with a lot of talent at all 3 levels, which, again, a rising tide that lifts all boats for all players that are in that lineup. Of course, they're dealing with the Ramsey injury and such, but there's still a ton of talent at every level of that defense. So that's just another piece there that someone who doesn't get the headlines might not be someone that's talked about enough or is really appreciated, but has a key role for the Dolphins and could be, a valuable player in all-22 as far as a rotational piece is concerned if you need him for a given week.
Right, exactly. I think that's the best way to put it, right? If you have him as your defensive interior 3, that's the perfect spot for him, right? Because there's a chance he's not going to get that snap count minimum as a starter, even though it's a small chance. He's a great player to have. But let's get into kind of some of the performances of preseason week 3. Starting off just kind of with Brock Purdy, who played some snaps. He looked okay. He completed a pretty nice comeback to Ayuk. That was a long throw to the outside for a decent gain. And his arm looked fine. Like I didn't see any he wasn't like milking it at all. He wasn't kind of holding back. And he ran for a touchdown, but he didn't grade out particularly well for the game. No big time throws, but also no turnover worthy plays. So I think it was just kind of like a, happy to see him out there kind of thing.
That's Brock Purdy. No big time throws. Maybe not any turnover worthy plays either. That's Brock Purdy. He's back.
He's back. Right. Exactly. Next guy, Julius Chestnut. I'm going to talk about Sacred Heart running back that is now with the Titans. His second year, he had a blazing preseason, right? They destroyed the Patriots. He had 3 touchdowns in his 3 games and 2 were receiving. So kind of adds a different style running back to that room with Derrick Henry, right? Being that every down grind him kind of running back. Now you get a guy with a little more receiving ability, but he's probably going to be number 3 behind another running back that did really well, which is Tajay Spears. So interesting group to watch. And if Derrick Henry, now being, I think, 30 years old, starts to look a little bit washed, and this could be the last year he's with the Titans, I think Chestnut and Spears could be an interesting combo going forward. Bryce Young threw a couple pretty throws to Adam Thielen. One went for a touchdown on a really nice ball, but there was good protection on the play. Bryce just sat in the pocket, throws just like a kind of a lofting touchdown pass to Thielen, but it was really pretty, and that's what you want to see from him. So that's exciting. Anthony Richardson still showing a lot of good, but also a lot of bad. Struggling with accuracy. Even when he's completing passes, they're kind of outside the frame of the receiver that you typically see your starting quarterback make. The interesting thing is he's still hitting those big time throws like with ease. Those are the throws that he makes look easy. And another interesting thing is they're running a ton of RPO. So every highlight you see of him is basically an RPO play where he's, faking a handoff, throwing the ball, but he adds a different element, right? When you have a running quarterback doing those kind of plays, it's not just run, pass, it's run, pass, run, right? He has that third element where he could always tuck and just go. And I think defenses are already seeing how dangerous he could be with that. So I really like that for him. But Ray, what did you think of his fly, Eagles fly celebration there?
I mean, the stakes couldn't be any higher, I mean, you just have to bust out that celebration when, just everything is on the line, you just lay it all out there and it's just that competitive fire, you can't help it. You can't help it. You just can't contain that beast,
Yeah. Guys having fun, little JV, but guys having fun.
I think you glossed over the real discussion here, which is that Sam Darnold's the best quarterback in San Francisco. I'm just going to say it again. He's the best quarterback in San Francisco.
We'll just keep going. Kenny Pickett led the preseason.
Look at the grades.
Kenny Pickett led the preseason with a perfect 4 for 4 at the end of his preseason run, but he led all quarterbacks with a 93.7 PFF grade. I don't know what Sam Darnold's was. I'm assuming it was much worse than that. Drew Lock and Jordan Love.
Good. Kenny Pickett's not in San Francisco. What does that have to do with that? Why are you comparing those two?
No, I'm just saying, Brock Purdy's at least, starting level player. Sam Darnold has proven he's probably not. Drew Lock and Jordan Love have finished off what they also had very strong preseasons, and they battled each other, each throwing what looked like the easiest touchdown ever, but both looked really good. So Drew Lock, another guy, another backup quarterback. You're talking about Sam Darnold. I'm talking about Drew Lock. But Jordan Love being a starter there in Green Bay, pretty exciting to see that he had a pretty good preseason. There's one thing I wanted to talk to you about that I didn't prep you for at all, but every year there's usually a team that has a draft class that helps transform the future of that organization, right? I don't know if you remember the Colts a few years ago had one, right, with Quentin Nelson and a couple other offensive linemen, Darius Leonard, who I don't think goes by Darius anymore. Shaquille Leonard. And then you even go a little further back, right? And it happened to the Saints where they drafted a ton of starters in one draft. I think that there could be one of those classes in this draft class. And I hate to say it because I always like to hate on the Browns, but so far the picks that they made seem to be really, really good players. And they didn't even have a first round pick. So I wanted to kind of get your thoughts around guys like Cedric Tillman, Saki Aiki, DTR, DeJuan Jones, and Luke Weiler, right? Like that's a ton of names that showed out this preseason. Obviously, we need to see it in the regular season, but could this be one of those classes?
Yeah, and it's funny because, like you mentioned, no first round pick, right? And we talked about a lot of those guys, and we liked a lot of those guys, right? DeJuan Jones in particular, huge upside player at offensive tackle, all the way in the 4th round. I mean, that's, he's not a complete player by any stretch, but that's a heck of a pick in the 4th round because apparently in his pre-draft interviews, he talked about, dreaming about playing basketball. Like, okay. I want my offensive tackles playing basketball. That's very good for their mirroring and their footwork, and it translates really well. So whatever, right? Cedric Tillman, another just big body receiver that really was hampered by some injuries in college and could have went a lot higher, and probably a year ago if his college career just went according to plan, right? So he's a prototype wide receiver. Siaki Ika, the defensive interior player, kind of what you see is what you get, just a big, stout interior, player there with a lot of strength. We've talked ad nauseum already about Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Bobby loves him. He's had a strong preseason. And we spent a lot of time on Luke Weipler at center when doing our sort of center overview and preview of the class back in the spring. And Luke Weipler was one of those guys who performs really well. Frame wasn't prototypical, but again, we're talking about centers. They usually aren't. And then everything else sort of checked out when you just watch the tape and watch them play football. So for him to go all the way, to pick 190 in the 6th round, that's a heck of a pick for the Browns. So I think in each pick they got value at the very least, right? Given that they didn't have a first round pick, didn't have a pick until the 3rd round. So, but the majority of those picks from round, 2 picks in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and then Weipler in the 6th, they got good value in each of those and seem to have hit on the majority of them, at least right off the bat. So again, you kind of tap the brakes a little bit because you have Deshaun Watson there. So it's not like, DTR is going to have a big role as a starter right off the bat or anything like that to really impact that franchise. But all the other players around him, you're talking a wide receiver, an offensive tackle. I mean, those are 2 of the, top 3 or 4 premium high value positions in the NFL. And early returns on those picks are really good. And then you have Luke Weipler as well at center. They already have a strong offensive line. So if you can hit on those young draft picks so that in the future you're not spending, high-end resources, whether it's on free agency or in the draft, to replenish that offensive line, then that's great for your roster health moving forward. So yeah, the Browns so far, early on have done a really good job, in 2023 with their rookies. So yeah, I could totally see that happening. Again, none of them have played a regular season NFL game yet, but the early returns are positive. And even just coming out of that draft or heading into the draft, we talked about a lot of those players pretty favorably.
Right, exactly. All right, so let's move on to our hidden gem segment, right? Everybody's favorite, and we're going to do the NFC East. And I'm a little bit reluctant to do this just because Ray's a Cowboy fan, and I think he's going to just have nothing but bad things to say about everybody else. So I'm going to kick it off with the Commanders. And I am pulling a Ray when I say that Sam Cosmi is brutally underrated, and he's probably somebody people know about already, but I think he needs to be talked about more. So I'm going to talk about him. So Cosmi was not my favorite prospect coming out of Texas, but he was a very reliable player and essentially was placed right into the lineup there in Washington. He played left tackle in college, but moved to right tackle where he played his first 2 years for Washington. But he dealt with some injuries, right? So he missed some time. And personally, I think he's better fit for the tackle position with his frame, right? He's kind of a long player, but they are moving him to guard this year. The reason I want to talk about him is because guard, we've talked about, right? It's an extremely hard position to draft in All-22. So when you get a guy like Cosmi, who's already graded out really well in his young career, right? He's a high 70s player already playing at the tackle position, moving to guard. That's a very valuable investment and in a young player. One thing I want to note, moving him to guard, one of his biggest strengths is his run blocking. And in 2021, he had an 81.3 run blocking grade on 192 run blocking snaps. So again, something you really like to see in a player that's going to be moving to guard is that his strength is run blocking. Cosmi kind of surprises you as well because he's so long and he's so tall. He sets his body really well on run plays. You can see he's always putting himself in good position. He creates lanes off of himself, something that usually you see kind of the smaller, heavier guards do because they could get into position easier, and they have like lower center of gravity where they could create these lanes. But Cosmi does it really well at his height, so something I like to see. So again, if you're going to gamble on a player at guard, I think you get a couple positives. One, he could play multiple positions. He grades pretty highly already, and he plays guard, and he's young. So go ahead and bet on a guy like Cosmi.
Yeah, I thought about picking him. I just thought that would be taking the easy way out, so I didn't pick him. But
Yeah.
you know,
And now you're like, you're Mr. like, trying not to take the easy way, but okay.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I like the player. I like the pick for all the things you mentioned there. Um, Given the lack of depth or quality depth at guard in the league, because like I said, I almost took him as my player. So I'm just going to go one slot over, and I went with Charles Leno. And it's weird because it's like kind of 10-year, 31-year-old vet be a hidden gem, but yeah, just because he's been around a while doesn't mean he's still not like hidden. Um, and Leno is very undervalued, in my opinion. Would you start him for the next 5 years? Probably not, given his age. But he's had 3 straight years of 74.9, 81.2, and 71.6 overall season grades at offensive tackle. That's very good play at a valuable position. And his current ranking is around the 30th round of a startup draft as we sit here today. So he can give you perhaps 2 solid more years of play at offensive tackle. And then, just kind of looking ahead a bit here, we had some draft talk early on in this episode, but you could take one of the top offensive tackles, say in the rookie draft next year, as that should be a good tackle class. And you give yourself some real value at a premium position in a startup this year with a vet like Charles Leno, and then sort of set your roster up for the future with a young player coming up in maybe the 2024 rookie draft. And that allows you to, again, address some other positions that are not quite as deep early on in a startup. So it's kind of a strategy play that you could take here. If you get someone like Charles Leno, who is falling a little bit, not necessarily because of his quality of play, but just because of his age. People see 31 plus years old and they want to go elsewhere, chase some upside at offensive tackle, which I totally get, and usually what I do as well. But I think this is a really interesting play that you could have with someone like Charles Leno at offensive tackle, in your draft strategy here. The only thing is just don't start him versus Micah Parsons when they play the Cowboys. That goes for just about any offensive tackle in the league except for maybe like 3 or 4.
Nice. I knew you had to throw that in there at the end, but that's a great choice. Offensive linemen, especially tackle, is a position that I typically try to draft early and often in all 22 drafts. But when I didn't, and there were leagues where I didn't, I saw myself streaming Charles Leno, right? Like I'd either draft him myself later on, or he was somebody that I was always looking for in trades because he does grade decently well, right? It's funny that we both went offensive line in Washington, considering that has been their weakness the last few years, and the defensive side of the ball has been so strong. But I think it says something to kind of the defensive side of the ball, where it almost feels as if they've missed their window a little bit, where that dominant defense that we all expected maybe didn't come, right? And maybe they missed the boat on it. I think Emmanuel Forbes makes it a little bit easier for them, right? They lacked a little bit in the backside of that defense, so Forbes will help that out. But then you look at like Chase Young, and if they truly missed on Chase Young, and Chase Young isn't going to be this game-changing, edge rusher, I don't know. That defensive side of the ball could end up being a weakness there instead of a strength.
Yeah, that's the one thing they were missing, was that sort of that quality secondary over the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. They finally get it, and then it's like, okay, yeah, is the window closed? And that's why it's tough. It's tough building a full team here. A lot of things have to go your way, even if you make the right moves, right? Nobody sat there and said Chase Young wasn't the clear consensus pick a couple years ago, right? But sometimes just bad breaks happen, and that really leaves a void and a hole, and kind of closes that window quicker than you'd think, because those picks are so valuable. When you do miss on them, if they do, or even if he comes back and he's just a top 20 type of edge rusher, that's a good player. But for where you took him and what you invested in him, it's harsh to say, but that would be a miss still. So, and those do come back to bite you. But again, we love the Forbes pick, right? Got some sleepers on the offensive line there. They got some good weapons on the outside. So they're still kind of like a puncher, in the ring there, so to speak, on a week-to-week basis. They have the ability to score on you and to still kind of muck things up, at least in the trenches on both sides of the ball. So it's a pretty rowdy, rough team to watch on a week to week basis, where maybe they're not always firing on all cylinders. They're not a high flying, just Kansas City Chiefs type offense. Just given you don't know what you're going to get out of Sam Howell, for example, but an interesting team to watch because there's some pieces there. There's some upside pieces. There's some just kind of consistent, solid pieces, and then there's those that. Especially at the quarterback position, right, where you don't know what you're going to get. And there could be some good flashes, but also some low lows, and you just kind of got to ride it out and see what you got.
Cool. So a few weeks ago, we did the AFC West, and you talked about the Cardinals, and you picked Isaiah Simmons, who is now on the Giants, right? And a few weeks ago, I kind of ridiculed you for choosing Isaiah Simmons, and I think I would do it again if that was still the case, just because that team has been one of the worst organizations in the NFL over the last 5 years. Simmons now is going to the Giants, which is kind of being seen as this up-and-coming team, right? It's got a new head coach from last year that did really well. Defensive coordinator is one of the best in the NFL and likes to blitz. He's a very blitz-heavy coordinator. And they bring in Simmons, who was drafted way higher than probably he should have been, but has been used as a Swiss Army knife for that defense. One of the things that I always try to say is with the linebackers, it's about giving them a consistent job and not asking them to do too much. So when you drafted Isaiah Simmons and he graded, very poorly, in my mind, it's because he was asked to do way too much as a young player in the NFL. So just for context, Simmons lined up on the defensive line 432 times, in the box 1,000 times, as a safety 63 times, in the slot 641 times, and then as an outside corner 65 times. That is in his first 3 years. So he has basically played every position in the NFL and pretty evenly split among corner, defensive line, and as a linebacker, right? So you look at that and you say, you're setting this player up to not be successful. He played 239 snaps so far on his career as a pass rusher. So 239 snaps rushing the passer. And in those snaps, he had 20 hurries and 7 sacks. So basically, he had a hurry every 12 snaps that he played at edge rusher. For context, last year, the 5th best edge rusher for hurries was Danielle Hunter. He had 47, which puts him at a rate of 12.12. So obviously, the sample size is much different, right? I'm looking at the entire career of Simmons, right? And the amount of snaps he has is probably half of what Hunter had just last year alone. But in those snaps, he did it just as efficiently as Hunter did. So now, again, he goes to the Giants, who like to blitz a lot, right? And I could just see them. We've talked about this. We've tweeted this, that we think that he's going to be that kind of pass rusher for the Giants. I don't think he's Micah Parsons. I don't think he's a linebacker that can purely be this edge rusher and be successful. But I do think that he can be a role player. As a first round pick, you need him to be Micah Parsons, right? As a top 5 or whatever he was pick, that's what you need him to be. The Giants investment being, what was it, a 6th round pick or something like that, so much smaller, where if he ends up just being a role player, but a very effective role player they bring him in to rush the passer, or they bring him in to play safety every once in a while, I think he could be very, very effective in that role. So I love this for the Giants, and I think this could be a great investment for you as an All-22 owner, because, where do we have him listed as, right? He's probably at linebacker or safety, right? So you get kind of edge rusher production on limited snaps, but he's going to grade out for a safety, so it's low risk for you as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're just going to copy my homework from a couple episodes ago and just take all the reasons why I liked Isaiah Simmons and just, recycle it for the Giants. But yeah, it's Wink Martindale. I think we tweeted about this, right? Wink Martindale is an aggressive defensive play caller. And I think what we noticed with Isaiah Simmons is that he's at his best when he is, it's actually a little weird. He's at his best when he's moving forwards and moving backwards. It's like, okay, well, what other directions are there as a defensive player, right? But we mean in the sense of, he's not a read and react linebacker, right? He may have big linebacker size, but that's just not his game, right? He's an effective pass rusher, or has shown to be an effective pass rusher so far. And then in pass coverage as well, with his length, he has also shown some adeptness in pass coverage. Where he has struggled is when it came to that diagnosing and reading and reacting and such. And so I think with Wink Martindale, that's not what he's going to ask him to do. He's going to be aggressive. He's going to ask him to blitz and rush the passer, and probably drop back in those passing lanes and kind of muck things up, because he's got that 6'4" plus frame, and that length is really hard to throw over and around for quarterbacks in the passing game. So, I think with the DNA of Wink Martindale, he's just going to use him either one of those two ways, and not necessarily in any traditional linebacker sense, which is where Isaiah Simmons would get into trouble. So I think it's a great landing spot for Isaiah Simmons. And kind of similar to that, I went with Xavier McKinney. And, we still have to kind of see how the roles ultimately shake up, right? But Julian Love is no longer there in New York. And I feel like I've picked safeties a lot this series, but that's probably because there just aren't a lot of outwardly good ones, right? So the ones that are good and maybe gems are kind of hidden, which is the point of the segment, right? Xavier McKinney's been banged up for the last couple years, and it really seemed to catch up to him last season. But in 2021 and 2020, he posted solid 70+ grades, and is set for another big role on that defense. So you can envision a scenario where that pass rush really improves with the development of Kayvon Thibodeau. We mentioned the creativity of Wink Martindale and how he's going to use a piece like Isaiah Simmons to go along with their already really stout interior defensive line. So the foundation of that defense can be a big contributor to the success of someone like Xavier McKinney on the back end. But the flip side of that is I'm still a little worried about the corners in front of him. If someone like Deonte Banks has a big role early on at corner, it's a great sign for Banks, but a rookie corner could put the back end of the defense in some tough spots when he just kind of goes through those typical growing pains that you see from young players. So that may make someone like McKinney matchup dependent based on opponent. But I think overall it's a pretty make or break year for Xavier McKinney. And if he's healthy, I think you can go back and see some of those more quality performances that we saw a couple years ago, come to fruition again in 2023.
Yeah, that's a good pick. And safety is another position that's super difficult to draft, and it's hard to find a guy that's consistent. I think not only, you're calling out and saying this is going to be a good player, somebody to bet on, but I think the Giants are doing the same thing for the reasons you said, right? They get rid of Julian Love, but not only that, they actually name McKinney a captain for that position group. So, they're thinking about him as a leader of this team. So I think they're expecting big things too. Let's go to the Cowboys, right? So, my typical tackle that I like is body control, good hands, all of those things that, we talked about with like Abraham Lucas, right? Those are the guys I like. But there's also guys like Terrence Steele, right? Who are undrafted free agents, probably didn't deserve, the shot in the league at first, but proved that they deserve to be there with their play, right? He's switched between left and right tackle in the past, but he's kind of settled in now at right tackle. And he's a guy that's essentially blown away expectations. The reason I talked about like the body control guys is Steele isn't really that player. He's an effort player. And that's something that, like back in the day, that's what I prided myself on, right? Like, being undersized, you kind of have to be an effort player. He's definitely not undersized, but he's an effort player where you see snaps that he has against like Joey Bosa, where he's just not afraid to battle, right? He doesn't have great form. He's definitely losing the battle, but he's putting everything that he has into it. And there are snaps that he actually wins, right? And he comes out fine, right? And he protects his quarterback, which is the most important thing. So I really liked that in Terrence Steele's tape. But besides that, just look at his grading, right? He essentially had a 73.9 grade last year, which is really good. And it's the second season where he was consistently kind of playing at one position. This is going to be the third, and I expect him to really settle in at right tackle and just be more consistent, right? Have better technique, have a better frame. You get to do that when you play one position, and he hadn't really done that early on in his career. So I'm betting on a guy like Steele. I love the high effort. I like some of the things in his game. He has a powerful punch. One thing I'd say he definitely loses a bit on is he punches a little too hard at times, where the defensive end or the edge rusher gets separation from his body and ends up being able to get that second move and get around him. Quarterback holding on to the ball a little bit too long could cause problems for a guy like Steele. But Dak, again, we talked about is a pro's pro and can get the ball out quick. So I like it. I like Steele. He's a guy I'm going to bet on. Don't necessarily want him as a starter on my team, but if he's my fourth tackle, I'm really happy about that.
Yeah, Terrence Steele's a brawler, and I think we see a lot of it on social media as far as all the different linemen that work with Duke Manyweather and the impact that he has on offensive line play. I think Terrence Steele might be the greatest example of how Duke Manyweather can really help and develop an offensive lineman, because if you just go back and watch Terrence Steele at like the Senior Bowl, a few years ago, you would have thought this guy would be gone in the first round of cuts in a training camp, and he was nothing more than a camp body at that time. But similar to how you described his style of play, that's just kind of how his approach is to the game. He's just kind of a scrappy, just brawler. And when you are 6'6" with super long arms and you have that tenacity on a snap-to-snap basis, you kind of just stick around until you get a shot, and then he just kind of ran with it. So he's coming off of a knee injury suffered during the season last year, but was basically a full participant for most of training camp already, and is set to just be in the starting lineup week 1 at his usual right tackle spot. They solidified Zach Martin's contract next to him over at that right guard spot. So the surroundings are familiar again. And so I think you can expect more of the same from Terrence Steele. I went on the other side of the ball here and went with cornerback Deron Bland, who showed a knack for playmaking last year as a rookie with 5 interceptions and I think 2 pass breakups, which I'm pretty sure that interception total led all rookies. And this was, I think, a 5th round draft pick in the 2022 draft. And so he finished the season with a 74.9 coverage grade, primarily from the slot last year, which will be his primary role again this season with Stephon Gilmore opposite Trayvon Diggs on the outside. And what we've seen from those playmaking type of corners like Diggs in Dan Quinn's scheme is that year over year, they steadily kind of improve on a down to down basis. Whether or not they get that same amount of turnovers and interceptions and such, that can be variable, right? That can vary based on targets and just, the bounce of a ball at times. But that steady improvement that we've seen elsewhere from players kind of like, Bland with his style of play, if you look at someone like Trayvon Diggs, kind of gives me a good feeling about Deron Bland as well. They're really high on him in Dallas. Plus, you have Micah Parsons as a full-time edge now. They invested in the defensive line in the draft. So the surroundings on that defense are great for a young player to continue to develop, who's already shown that knack for playmaking. And now it's just a matter of sort of rounding the rest of his game into form. And we sort of have some proof of concept with that already at the cornerback position under Dan Quinn in Dallas. So I like the arrow pointing up for Deron Bland as a hidden gem from Dallas.
Nice. That's a really good pick. Something you didn't mention, right? You said that Stephon Gilmore's there, but I've already heard rumors that he's really helping out that cornerback group that is a young group, right? He wants to see Diggs become one of the best corners in the league. He's helping him become that. But you look at a guy, like the guy you're talking about and saying, what can he do for him, right? A guy that as a rookie had 5 interceptions, maybe this cornerback room is going to be special in a couple of years, right? If it's not this year. So that's a great pick. I like that. I'm going to talk about the Eagles. I'm going to talk about Kenny Gainwell. After an offseason where they added, the Eagles added DeAndre Swift, they had Rashad Penny, they had Trey Sermon. Kenny Gainwell seems to be their favorite. He's getting all the first team reps. And it's kind of interesting because when you look at what they are trying to do there in the Eagles, right? They're trying to be this fast paced, kind of high octane offense, right? And they run a lot of RPO. So you insert a guy like Gainwell, who is more of that than probably any of those other guys, right? Like definitely more than Penny, definitely more than Sermon. Maybe Swift is one of those guys too. But Swift just really hasn't proven himself in the NFL yet. And if he was going to do it, right, he had all the opportunity to do it with the Lions. So maybe there's just something missing from his game. So I look at Kenny Gainwell and I say, he's a guy that in 2 years, he had 121 rushing attempts, which is basically nothing. But in those attempts, he has a 4.4 yard per carry number, and he has 73 receptions. He has 73 receiving targets. So, not extreme numbers, but it also means he doesn't have a lot of wear and tear on his body. The rumors, the last couple of weeks were that the Eagles were in on Jonathan Taylor, but that hasn't happened, right? They didn't go and get Jonathan Taylor. Taylor's now going to be out the first 4 games, no matter what. So even if the Eagles do end up trading for him down the road, it's not going to be now. And we're going to get to see Gainwell in this offense and see what he can really do if he's given first team reps. just with how good this offense is, right? With the receiving weapons they have, with the offensive line they have, Gainwell is just going to be kind of like this afterthought. And being an afterthought sometimes isn't the worst thing in the world because it leads to production, right? Hidden production. So All-22 is basically a game that I play with that zero running back strategy. Like I don't draft running backs until very, very late, just because they have, the weight is under 3%. It's the, if it's not the lowest position in All-22, it's bottom 3. I don't remember off the top of my head. So I don't really think about investing in a running back when, think about a center, right? So the two probably lowest positions in All-22, you could have a center for 15 years, right? Jason Kelce is proving that centers will play a long time in the NFL. So if you get a good one, they can play a really long time. Running back is not the same thing there, right? So where maybe I would invest in a center, I wouldn't do the same thing in a running back in All-22 because again, like they don't last. So similar to how the NFL's treating it, right? Where a guy like Jonathan Taylor, who's considered one of the best guys and is a young guy in the NFL, they don't want to re-sign that guy. So for me, I would rather take a bet on a guy like Gainwell, not put all my money in a Jonathan Taylor. I'll just take Gainwell and, being that hidden guy in that offense, he could have a great year. So I'm excited about Gainwell. That's my hidden gem.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you went there because outside of that, the way I look at the rest of that roster is there's nothing hidden about this roster. I think everything with this roster is what you see is what you get. And that's a testament to what Howie Roseman has done, right? But basically, anywhere else you look, it's an established player with a history of production or someone with, a high amount of investment in like a Jalen Carter or Jordan Davis or something like that. Right. So there really is no hidden gem in this roster. It's just a bunch of gems just all over the place. And I think the way he's constructed that roster is, as you mentioned, with the lower value position, so to speak, at running back, sort of being where you just kind of churn some of these assets where you didn't invest so highly in, but because of what you've built, you get that same production out of them, is the right way to do it. And so that allows someone like Gainwell to be a gem based off of everything you mentioned there. And so, yeah, outside of that, there's nothing else hidden about this roster. I mean, I'm not going to pick that safety. What's his face? Reed Blankenship. No, that is not a hidden gem. No, it's not. He's not a hidden gem. So, yeah, I think Gainwell's really the only answer here in Philly because everything else is basically a known asset and a quality known asset at that. So, kudos to Howie Roseman on that one.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, even like you look at your boy from last year, Nakobe Dean, right? Like he was the top talked about linebacker and they got him in like the 4th round or something, right? And he's going to be starting this year, but it's not a hidden gem. Everybody loves Nakobe Dean. So I agree with your take. Probably not something we need to do there and go into. But yeah. All right. So guys, not next week, but the week after is the start of the NFL season. We have a week off before things are going to really heat up. And I'm thinking Ray and I might get into a little bit of a different strategy with this podcast, doing some more episodes, maybe get back into that daily routine. We'll see what we have time for. But yeah, we're excited. We're super excited for the NFL season. Get yourself ready. And again, if you haven't yet, sign up for All-22 using promo code second season for $20 off your All-22 membership for 2023. That's the number 2 ND season for $20 off your All-22 membership in 2023. If you haven't yet, go sign up. And thank you for tuning in. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at All22PFF, and leave us a review wherever you watch or listen to your podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
Go.